She thought she was running from the world. Turns out, she was being led to something far more incredible. After years in combat and a bitter divorce that left her hollow, former Marine Ella Morgan vanished into the snow-capped silence of the Colorado Rockies. No phone. No neighbors. Just a fire, a roof, and ghosts of the past she couldn't quite silence. Until one night, something scratched at her cabin door. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a threat. It was a dog, half-dead, frostbitten, with steel blue eyes that saw through her like glass. She called him Echo. But it was he who gave her a voice again. Because Echo hadn't just wandered off, he had escaped. From someone. From something. And he came with a purpose. When he wouldn't stop staring into the woods, Ella followed him, rifle on her back, survival instincts sharp. What she found buried beneath that forest snow wasn't just an abandoned shack or a man chained to a bed. It was her family's darkest secret. And a love story that war tried to erase. You're not going to believe who she finds, or what this dog was trying to protect all along. Ella Morgan wasn't the kind of woman who cried easily. She'd been through hell, twice. 2 tours in Afghanistan, an IED that nearly ended her life, and a battlefield promotion that meant more to others than it ever did to her. But when she came home, it wasn't shrapnel that haunted her. It was silence. Silence in the hospital. Silence in the marriage that slowly collapsed under the weight of what she'd brought back. Silence from friends who didn't know what to say, and eventually stopped saying anything at all. The official term on her discharge papers was medically retired, but Ella knew the truth: she was broken. Not in the way people could see. No visible wounds to explain the night terrors. No missing limbs to justify the pills. Just a woman with too many ghosts, too many memories, and not enough strength left to fake being okay. So she disappeared. Not from the grid, but from life. She took the keys to her late Aunt Caroline's cabin, nestled deep in the Colorado Rockies, and drove until the pavement ended. No cell signal. No social media. No people asking what the army was like. Just snow, trees, and the occasional howl of something wild in the dark. The cabin had been empty since Caroline passed the year before. Ella didn't expect comfort, just space. 4 walls. A working fireplace. Enough canned food to last through winter. And maybe, if the world was kind, a few nights of sleep without screaming awake. But isolation is a funny thing. You think you're running away, but you're really just making space for the truth to catch up. For Ella, the cabin wasn't just a retreat. It became a mirror. Every creak in the floor, every crackle in the fire, every echo of a memory, forced her to face what she'd buried. The faces of soldiers she couldn't save. The rage she didn't know how to express. The guilt she couldn't shake. She brought weapons. Of course, she did. Not out of paranoia, but out of muscle memory. A rifle in the closet. A combat knife under her pillow. She wasn't scared. She was prepared for whatever. What she wasn't prepared for was companionship. And certainly not the kind that arrived one blizzard-heavy night, bleeding on her doorstep, eyes locked onto hers like they'd been searching for her all along. Ella came to that cabin to lose herself. To bury the woman she used to be. But someone, had other plans. The dog would arrive with answers she never knew she needed. And a past she didn't know belonged to her. But for now, all she knew was this: she didn't come here to be found. And yet, something had found her. The storm came down like the mountains themselves were exhaling, fierce, loud, and relentless. Thick snow pounded the roof of the old cabin, the wind screaming through the trees like a wounded thing. Ella Morgan had learned to sleep through worse: mortar fire, Black Hawk rotors, her ex-husband's lies, but that night, even she felt uneasy. The kind of unease that sets in when nature itself goes too quiet between bursts. The kind that makes even trained soldiers sit up and listen. And then she heard it. Scratch. Scratch. Not loud. Not frantic. Just desperate. Ella reached for the knife she kept under the cot. No hesitation. She moved like muscle memory, slow and silent, eyes narrowing at the sound. It came again. A faint scrape at the front door. Whatever was out there, it wasn't trying to break in. It was asking, pleading, to be let in. She flicked on the porch light. Snow whipped sideways in the wind, and in the swirling whiteout, she saw it, a shape. Low to the ground. Slumped. Bleeding. Cautiously, knife in hand, Ella opened the door just enough to see more clearly. There, lying in a pool of crimson against the untouched snow, was a dog. A Malamute or maybe a husky, massive, muscular, and unmoving. His fur was soaked and matted, a streak of blood trailing across his side. But it wasn't the wounds that froze her in place. It was his eyes. Steel blue. Piercing. Not wild with fear or pain, but focused. Intense. A gaze that felt human. And for one surreal moment, Ella felt like he was studying her, measuring her soul, not just her face. She crouched. "Hey," she whispered, voice rasped from disuse, like she hadn't spoken aloud in days. The dog whimpered once. Tried to lift his head. Failed. Instinct kicked in. Not fear, training. She moved fast. Cleared the table. Grabbed towels, alcohol, gauze. Her hands knew what to do even if her mind was still catching up. Combat medicine didn't leave you. Even after the war did. As she cleaned his wounds, she saw something that made her breath hitch. Bite marks. Deep lacerations. But also, straight cuts. Almost surgical. Not just nature. Someone had done this. His tag, crusted in ice, read one word, Echo. Echo, she repeated softly. His ears twitched. She wrapped him in blankets and placed him by the fire. He didn't growl. Didn't resist. He just watched her, with those eyes that seemed to know. Ella didn't realize it yet, but she hadn't just taken in a stray. She'd just opened the door to a mystery buried beneath years of betrayal, secrets, and family history long forgotten. And Echo? He wasn't just a wounded dog looking for help. He was the messenger of something much bigger. Something waiting out there in the dark. Ella had seen injuries before. She treated Marines under fire, sewn up wounds in sand-choked outposts with nothing but adrenaline and instinct. But this? This was different. This wasn't war. It was cruelty. Echo lay still on the cabin floor, his chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm as the fire cast flickering shadows across the walls. The room smelled of antiseptic, wet fur, and faintly, burnt flesh. Ella leaned in with gloved hands and a steady pulse, peeling back the matted fur with practiced care. At first, she thought he'd been mauled, bitten by a coyote, maybe a mountain lion. But the more she cleaned, the more it didn't add up. The puncture wounds were deep, yes. But some cuts were too precise, clean slices in parallel lines, as if made by a scalpel. Along his flank, the fur was scorched, the skin underneath blistered in unmistakable patterns. Burns. Straight-edged. Deliberate. Jesus, she whispered, feeling the familiar rise of controlled anger curl in her gut. Who did this to you? Echo didn't flinch. He simply stared at her with those glass-clear eyes, as if to say, I remember. Ella's hands paused over one particularly severe gash, stitched crudely with fishing line, now tearing open under infection. Not only had someone hurt him, they had tried to patch him up. Not to heal him. To keep him alive, barely. She cleaned the area in silence, her mind buzzing with unspoken questions. Had he escaped from a lab? A cabin? Someone's twisted version of training or punishment? She checked his collar again. Worn, cracked leather. One tag. One word, Echo. Whoever had owned him once didn't deserve him now. And yet, the dog had made it through a snowstorm, with these injuries, all the way to her door. That wasn't chance. That was willpower. Purpose. She finished wrapping his wounds, adding a few drops of antibiotics to his water. Then, gently, she placed her old army blanket over him. "You're safe now," she whispered. But in her gut, she knew that wasn't true, not really. Not yet. Because whatever did this to Echo? It wasn't done. She could feel it in the way his ears flicked toward the window. The way his eyes never stopped scanning the treeline. Like he was still listening for something. Or someone. That night, as the fire died down and snow piled thick against the cabin walls, Ella watched him from her armchair. Sleep came in short, ragged bursts. Each time she opened her eyes, he was awake. Facing the window. Unmoving. Alert. Echo wasn't just recovering. He was waiting. And that meant, so was she. By morning, the storm had passed, but something colder lingered in the air. Ella opened her eyes to find Echo already awake, resting but not relaxed, his head lifted, body stiff, eyes locked on the frosted window that faced the tree line. The snow had stopped, but the forest beyond looked like something out of a dream or a warning. Silent. Dense. Watching. Echo didn't bark. Didn't whine. He stared. For hours. At first, Ella dismissed it as instinct. Dogs react to sounds humans can't hear, maybe a raccoon, maybe a deer. But every time she looked up from her cup of instant coffee, there he was again. Same position. Same fixed gaze. And every once in a while, a low whine would escape him, so soft, it felt more like grief than fear. When she moved toward the window to see what he was looking at, Echo's tail thumped the floor faintly. Encouragingly. "You see something I don't?" she asked, her breath fogging the cold glass. "Or someone." No tracks. Just snow. But Echo wasn't fixated on what was there. He was focused on where. Midday came. Ella unwrapped his bandages, checked the wounds. He was healing faster than expected, but his obsession with the woods only deepened. He paced to the door, pawed at it, returned to the window, and lay down again with a heavy exhale, like trying to communicate with someone who refused to listen. By dusk, she couldn't take it anymore. "You're not gonna quit, are you?" she muttered, grabbing her coat. "All right. Let's see what's out there." She cracked open the door. A blast of cold hit her face. Echo limped to her side, still favoring his right leg, but alert. Determined. The moment her boots hit the snow, he moved, slow, deliberate steps toward the woods. He paused at the tree line, looking back. "Lead the way," she said. It wasn't a walk. It was a mission. The kind where you don't know the destination, but you trust the one who does. Echo walked in straight lines, pausing only to sniff at trees, his head occasionally jerking toward deeper forest paths. It felt like he wasn't searching, he was remembering. 15 minutes in, Ella realized her breath had quickened, not from exertion, but from something else. Anticipation. Fear. Recognition. There was something out here. Something Echo wanted her to see. And maybe, something waiting for her to find it. When she finally spoke again, it wasn't to him, but to herself. "This dog isn't lost," she whispered. "He's a survivor. And he's leading me back to the place he escaped." She didn't know it yet, but what lay ahead wasn't just another mystery. It was her legacy. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. No birdsong. No wind. Just the sound of her boots crunching over snow and Echo's lighter, uneven footfalls ahead of her, each step more deliberate than the last. Ella scanned her surroundings like muscle memory, eyes on movement, ears tuned for the unnatural. It was like being on patrol again. Only this time, there was no squad, no radio, no objective. Just a dog and a feeling that something was waiting in the cold. The forest swallowed them whole. Thick evergreens loomed overhead, their snow-heavy branches casting long shadows even as daylight faded. Ella checked her watch. Nearly 4:30 p.m. temperature dropping. They'd been hiking for close to 2 hours with no clear destination. Echo, she called softly, unsure whether she was asking a question or giving him permission to stop. He didn't. He pressed on. And then, he froze. At the edge of a narrow rise, the trees parted just enough to reveal a small clearing, and in its center, a structure. Old. Low. Hidden beneath layers of snow and time. It looked like a forgotten hunter's cabin or maybe a storage shed. Weathered wood, sagging roof, a stone chimney with a faint wisp of smoke rising into the dusk sky. But what stopped Ella cold wasn't the sight of the building, it was the heavy iron chain coiled tightly around the front door handles. Secured with a rusted padlock. Someone's in there, she thought. Echo whined low and urgent, moving to the door, pawing at it with a kind of desperation she hadn't seen before. His entire body trembled, not from cold, but from memory. From recognition. Ella crouched beside him. You've been here before, haven't you? The dog didn't move. She stood, pulled the multi-tool from her pack. Years of combat had taught her how to work around locks, especially old ones. As she began to work the mechanism, her mind raced. Who would chain shut a building in the middle of nowhere? Why was Echo so desperate to return? And more urgently, what would she find on the other side of that door? After a few tense minutes, the lock gave a sharp click and dropped into her hand. Echo surged forward, nose to the seam, his tail rigid, muscles coiled. Ella gripped her hunting knife, pushed the door slowly open, and was hit by a wave of stale, frigid air and something else, sickness. Human. Old. Faint, but unmistakable. Hello? She called out. Silence. Then a faint creak. A shift of weight. A breath. She stepped inside, Echo tight at her heel. What lay beyond that door wasn't just a shack. It was a prison. And someone was still inside. The cabin was dark, except for the dim orange flicker of dying embers in a stone hearth. The air was thick, stale with time, damp with neglect, and laced with something sharp, like infection. A thin layer of dust coated the wooden floor, except for a narrow, scuff trail leading from the fireplace to the rear room. Echo moved with purpose. He didn't sniff. He didn't hesitate. He knew where he was going. Ella followed, knife drawn, senses locked in. Every step felt like it carried weight, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The back door creaked open under her hand, revealing a smaller room. That's when she saw him. An elderly man lay on a narrow cot, bundled beneath threadbare blankets, barely more than a shadow in the cold. His face was sunken, his lips cracked. Wisps of white hair clung to his scalp. His skin was ghost pale, except for the angry red scabs where an iron cuff dug into his wrist, chaining him to the bed frame. Her stomach dropped. Echo was already at his side, whining gently, nudging the man's shoulder with his nose. No growling. No barking. Just pure concern. Loyalty. The man stirred. Water, he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Ella dropped her bag and grabbed a tin cup, filling it from the emergency water she kept in her pack. Gently, she raised his head and held the cup to his lips. He sipped. Coughing. Wheezing. But he drank. His eyes fluttered open, pale blue, unfocused, but searching. Then they fixed on her face. For a moment, his expression shifted, confusion, then recognition, then something deeper. Something aching. Caroline, he whispered. Ella froze. That name. Her aunt's name. The woman whose cabin she now called home. The woman who'd raised her after her mother died. The woman who'd never spoken about her past, never mentioned a love, a fiancé, a tragedy. Just a long life lived alone in the woods. No, Ella said quietly. Caroline was my aunt. She passed away last spring. The man's face crumpled like wet paper. Gone, he breathed. She's gone. He closed his eyes. And for a terrifying second, she thought he was slipping away. No, no, hey, she said, tapping his shoulder gently. Stay with me. I need to know what happened. Why are you here? Who did this? He opened his eyes again, blinking slowly. Victor, he whispered. My nephew. Locked me in, took the radio, wanted the documents. Caroline's name on them. Documents. Victor. Shackles. A mining claim? Too much to process. But Ella's mind was moving fast now. The pieces weren't clear, but they were real. And this man, whoever he was, knew Caroline. Not in passing. Personally. I'm Ella, she said. Caroline's niece. You're safe now. I'm going to get you out of here. He coughed, weakly gripping Echo's fur. I waited, he whispered. I never stopped looking for her. And in that moment, Ella realized this wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of a story buried for decades, one she was now a part of. The old man, his name still a mystery, slipped back into unconsciousness, his shallow breaths audible beneath the rasp of the wind outside. Echo stayed beside him like a sentry, chin on the mattress, eyes never leaving the man's face. Ella moved quietly into the main room, adrenaline still pumping, brain in overdrive. She needed answers, and fast. Whoever this man was, he hadn't just been left to die. He'd been silenced. Systematically. The padlock, the missing radio, the bruises, the restraints, this wasn't neglect. This was intent. On the rickety table, beneath a cracked lantern, she spotted it, a leather-bound journal, edges curled with age, pages yellowed from moisture. It was the only thing in the room not covered in dust. She opened it. And everything changed. December 10th, Victor came again. Took the radio. Said it was broken. I don't believe him. Third time this month. I think he suspects I still have the originals. Ella kept reading, page after page of painful entries. The handwriting shaky but lucid. The content? Shocking. This man was named Walter Greaves. According to the journal, he had been engaged to her Aunt Caroline before being drafted and sent to Vietnam. Declared killed in action. Caroline, thinking him dead, had moved on, or tried to. But Walter hadn't died. He had been captured, held in a POW camp for years. When he finally returned home in the 70s, Caroline was gone. And the world he returned to had changed. Then came the twist. Walter and Caroline had invested in a piece of mountain property just before he deployed, a gold claim. Nothing major at the time. But recently, new tech revealed the site was still rich in untapped deposits. Worth millions. Ella's eyes widened as she flipped to a final entry, just 3 days old. Storm's coming. Victor brought firewood, but no food. He wants me to give up the documents. I won't. He threatened Echo. I think he knows I've hidden them. If anyone finds this, Caroline. I'm sorry I never came back in time. The next page was blank. Ella sat back in stunned silence. Victor wasn't just some neglectful nephew, he was a predator, trying to force an elderly man to hand over ownership of a gold-rich claim. A claim that legally belonged to Walter and Caroline, half of which, by inheritance, now belonged to Ella. Her stomach churned. This was more than a rescue. This was a cover-up. The man she found wasn't just someone's uncle. He was her aunt's lost fiancé. And Echo hadn't stumbled into her life by accident. He had led her here, for this. For justice. She clutched the journal tightly, her fingers shaking. Outside, the snow began to fall again. But inside the cabin, something else had been uncovered. A betrayal worth millions. And a love story that time and greed had tried to erase. It happened fast. One moment, the cabin was quiet, just the faint hiss of the fire, the rhythmic rasp of Walter's labored breathing, and the sound of pages turning as Ella flipped through the last entry of the journal. The next, Echo stiffened, ears up, tail rigid. A second later, he growled. Deep. Low. Not fearful, protective. Ella rose to her feet instinctively, grabbing the rifle from the corner and sliding toward the window. That's when she saw the shadow moving between the trees. Not a stranger. Him. Darren. Bundled in high-end winter gear, boots crunching through the snow, expression unreadable, but in his gloved hand was a small pack. Too casual. Too late in the day. Too confident. He thinks no one's here. The doorknob turned slowly. Ella stepped into position behind the door, rifle low but ready, breath calm. She'd done this dance before, in Afghanistan, in back alleys, in the homes of men who underestimated her. He stepped inside, brushing snow off his shoulders. And then Echo lunged. Teeth bared, growl erupting into a snarl that stopped Darren cold. What the, Echo? His shock was genuine. You're alive? That's when Ella stepped out of the shadows, voice steady. I wouldn't move if I were you. Darren spun. His eyes widened when he saw the rifle, and then narrowed fast. Who the hell are you? Ella Morgan. Caroline Winter's niece. The woman whose fiancé you've been starving to death in this rat trap. Darren blinked. For a beat, his mask dropped. Calculation flickered in his eyes. He took a half step back, raising his hands. I think you're confused, he said smoothly. My uncle has dementia. He wanders. He gets paranoid. I've been taking care of him. Chaining him to a bed? That's your idea of caregiving? Darren's smile faltered. Ella took a slow step forward, rifle still trained just below his chest. I read the journal. I know about the claim. The threats. The missing radio. The burns on the dog. That's when his charm snapped. His face twisted into something cold. You have no idea what you're involved in. I do now. He reached suddenly, too fast, for something in his coat. Ella didn't hesitate. She surged forward, slammed the rifle stock into his shoulder, spinning him off balance. As he stumbled, Echo snapped forward, clamping down on Darren's wrist just as the pistol slipped free and hit the wooden floor with a loud clunk. Darren screamed. Ella kicked the weapon across the room and shoved him back hard against the wall, her rifle pressing across his throat just enough to remind him he wasn't in control anymore. You tried to bury a man. A legacy. A truth, she hissed. Let me go, he spat, blood dripping from his wrist. You're making a mistake. No, Ella said. You did. Just then, Walter groaned from the bedroom. And that was the moment Ella knew, this wasn't over. But it was her story now. The flames were licking up the cabin walls by the time the first siren lights cracked through the snow-covered trees. Darren's last act, knocking over the oil lantern in a final fit of rage, had turned the confrontation into chaos. But Ella didn't blink. She'd carried Walter out of the back room, bundled him in a survival blanket, and followed Echo through the forest with smoke chasing their heels. No time for panic. Just training. Now, standing in a snow-choked clearing as rescue workers swarmed around them, Ella finally exhaled. Walter was loaded onto a stretcher, his fingers clutching Echo's fur even as medics checked his vitals. The dog refused to leave his side. and no one dared make him. An EMT turned to Ella, disbelief in her voice. You say he was locked in there? For weeks. Maybe months. And the man in cuffs? In custody, said the sheriff behind her, stepping forward. Thanks to your statement, the journal, and about a dozen charges we're lining up. Darren had been dragged out of the trees minutes earlier, burned, screaming, still insisting it was all a misunderstanding. But Ella had the truth. And something even more powerful, proof. Back at the hospital, she turned over the brittle mining claim papers, signed by both Walter Greaves and Caroline Winter in 1968. But the twist came when a nurse offered to run a fast-track DNA comparison using hospital records. The result came the next day. Walter Greaves wasn't just her aunt's long-lost love. He was also family, distantly, through blood. A match to Caroline's maternal line. The connection was real, verifiable. He's your aunt's fiancé, the sheriff confirmed. Presumed Kia in Vietnam. It's a miracle you found him. No, Ella said, eyes on Echo, he found me. She stood beside Walter's hospital bed, watching him sleep peacefully for the first time since she'd met him. Tubes still ran from his arm, and monitors beeped steadily, but the man who'd once been a ghost, trapped and forgotten, was finally at rest. Echo lay curled on the floor beside him, tail gently swishing every few moments. Ella knelt down and ran her hand along the husky's back. I don't know how you knew, she whispered. But you did. A nurse stepped into the room, soft-voiced. He keeps asking for someone named Caroline. Ella's throat tightened. She's gone. But he's not alone anymore. There was grief, yes. But also a strange, glowing peace. Walter had waited decades for a reunion he never thought he'd get. And though it didn't come in the form he imagined, it had arrived, in the eyes of a woman who bore Caroline's name, her fire, her compassion. Ella had come to the mountains to disappear. Instead, she had uncovered a legacy, saved a man, and brought a truth back into the light. Echo thumped his tail once more. The past had found its voice. And the future, at last, had begun. 3 weeks later, the snow began to melt, but the weight in Ella's chest had already started to thaw. Walter was out of the hospital, thinner than before but stronger every day. His voice was steadier. His memories sharper. The color had returned to his face. They spent long afternoons on the cabin's porch, his hand wrapped around a mug of tea, Echo dozing at his feet, the sun finally warming the valley after weeks of white silence. But the biggest shift? The cabin didn't feel like a hideout anymore. It felt like home. With legal help from the sheriff's office and a very curious judge, the mining claim was declared valid, co-owned by Caroline Winter and Walter Greaves, now passed down to Ella by inheritance. The documents Darren had nearly burned were worth millions. But to Ella, it was never about gold. It was about roots. About family. About rebuilding something that war tried to erase. She used a portion of the claim money to renovate the cabin. New plumbing. Reinforced roofing. A ramp for Walter. Solar panels. A high-speed satellite line, not for TikTok or Facebook, but to stay connected, in case others out there needed what she had found here, rescue. With Walter's blessing, she converted the property into something bigger, Echo Ridge. A refuge for combat veterans. And animals like Echo, creatures who had seen too much and still had something left to give. The first rescues came within a month. A retired Marine with burn scars and nowhere to go. A Vietnam vet estranged from his kids. A German shepherd who flinched at loud sounds but loved belly rubs. Ella took them in, one by one. She didn't play therapist. She didn't promise healing. But she offered something harder to find. Belonging. Walter loved it. He'd sit by the window and tell stories from his youth to whoever would listen, sometimes about Caroline, sometimes about his years overseas. His voice always held a tremor, but never shame. He was finally telling his truth. Echo, of course, became a legend. Visitors asked about him first. Tourists took pictures with him. But he was never just a mascot. He was a messenger. The one who'd found Ella when she didn't even know she needed saving. The one who refused to give up on Walter, on the truth, or on her. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the sky turned gold, Ella stood on the porch watching Echo trot across the yard, tail wagging, ears perked. Behind her, Walter laughed softly at something on the radio. A war-era song playing in the background. And for the first time in years, Ella felt something rare, fragile, and real. Peace. Not because the world was fixed, but because they were. Sometimes, she realized, healing doesn't come in hospitals. It comes in the form of a battered dog at your door. And a past that refuses to stay buried until you're strong enough to face it. She came to the mountains to escape the noise. The world had taken so much from Ella Morgan, her sense of safety, her future plans, her faith in people. She didn't come here to heal. She came to disappear. To hide inside silence, where the ghosts couldn't reach her. But fate had other plans. And it came on 4 legs, bleeding in the snow. Echo didn't just find her. He chose her. And in following him into that forest, into that frozen, padlocked cabin, Ella stepped not away from her pain, but through it. What she discovered wasn't just an old man in chains. It was a story long buried beneath war, betrayal, and time. A man thought dead. A love never forgotten. A hidden fortune that had almost cost him his life. But more than that, Ella discovered something she never expected to find again. Belonging. In Walter, she saw the parts of her Aunt Caroline that had always been quiet mysteries, the long stairs at the ridge, the boxes of old letters never opened, the sighs after songs from a time no one else remembered. Now those pieces fit. In Echo, she found a mirror, a survivor who had been hurt by the world but never lost his will to fight. Who still believed in connection. In people. In second chances. And in herself? She found strength she thought she'd used up in war. Compassion she believed had died in the back of a transport truck. A voice she hadn't realized she'd silenced. She had come to leave the world behind. Instead, the world had quietly crept back in, through a dog's devotion, through the shaking hand of an old man reaching for hers, through the sound of laughter echoing across the porch at sundown. Now, every plank of that cabin meant something. The ramp Walter used each morning wasn't just practical, it was proof of endurance. The framed photo of Caroline on the mantel wasn't just nostalgia, it was legacy. The name on the mailbox, stenciled in black block letters, Echo Ridge, wasn't just branding. It was a promise. That no one gets left behind. That wounds don't have to end you. That sometimes, life offers a second beginning in the place you thought was your final retreat. Ella still wakes early. Still trains. Still scans the horizon when it's too quiet. The soldier in her hasn't left. But now, she smiles when she sees footprints in the snow beside Echo's. She came to disappear. Instead, she became something. A guardian. A granddaughter. A survivor. And for the first time in years, a home.